Build a wealth mindset. How to eliminate mental poverty and attract success. Most people spend their entire lives believing money is the thing they lack. They wake up every morning thinking the problem is outside of them. They blame the economy, their childhood, their bad luck, their job, their circumstances, the people around them. But very few ever stop long enough to confront the truth that changes everything. Poverty is not born in a bank account first. It is born inside the mind. Long before someone struggles financially, they usually struggle mentally. They stop believing they can grow. They stop believing they deserve more. They stop believing they can escape the invisible limits placed on them by fear, insecurity, distraction, and emotional exhaustion. There are people who work harder than everyone around them and still remain stuck in the same cycle year after year. They are constantly tired, constantly stressed, constantly overwhelmed, but nothing truly changes. Not because opportunities are absent, not because success is reserved for a special group of people. The real reason is much darker than that. Their minds have adapted to survival instead of expansion. They have unknowingly trained themselves to expect disappointment. And when a human being expects disappointment long enough, they stop taking bold action. They stop seeing possibilities. They stop trusting themselves. Eventually, they begin shrinking their dreams just to protect themselves from the pain of failure. That is how mental poverty quietly takes control of a person's life. Nobody notices it happening in the beginning. It happens slowly. A person starts accepting things they once promised themselves they would never tolerate. They lower their standards. They settle for environments that drain their energy. They surround themselves with people who normalize weakness, excuses, and mediocrity. They begin consuming distraction every single day because distraction feels easier than self-confrontation. Hours disappear scrolling through meaningless content while their future slowly collapses in silence. Deep down, they know they are capable of more. But capability without discipline changes nothing. And this is where most people become trapped forever. The modern world profits from distracted minds. A focused person is dangerous. A disciplined person is difficult to manipulate. A mentally strong person cannot easily be controlled by fear, trends, opinions, or emotional chaos. That is why so many people today feel mentally exhausted without understanding why. Their attention is constantly being stolen. Their emotions are constantly being triggered. Their minds never experience silence long enough to think clearly about the direction of their lives. The frightening part is that many people have become emotionally addicted to this chaos. They cannot sit alone with their thoughts anymore. They need noise. They need stimulation. They need constant entertainment because silence forces them to face the uncomfortable reality they have been avoiding for years. And the reality is this: the life they want cannot be built with the mindset they currently have. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 2, Paragraph 1, that a person's life is shaped by the quality of their thoughts. That idea is more dangerous than most people realize. Because if your thoughts are filled with fear, envy, insecurity, laziness, comparison, and emotional weakness, your future will slowly begin reflecting those exact patterns. A distracted mind creates a distracted life. A fearful mind creates a limited future. A disciplined mind creates opportunities where others only see obstacles. Most people wait for motivation to change their lives. That is why most people never change. Motivation is temporary. It disappears the moment discomfort appears. Real transformation begins when a person becomes tired of their own excuses. The moment someone stops blaming the world and starts taking responsibility for their own mind, everything begins to shift. Their decisions change, their habits change, their standards change, their confidence changes. Even the way they walk into a room changes because they no longer think like someone trapped in survival. The truth is that wealth is not only money. Wealth is clarity. Wealth is emotional control. Wealth is discipline. Wealth is focus. Wealth is the ability to think long-term while everyone else is addicted to immediate pleasure. And people who master those things eventually separate themselves from the majority without needing to announce it to the world. Some of the wealthiest minds in history were built during periods of pain, isolation, struggle, and uncertainty, because pressure reveals character. Pressure exposes weakness. Pressure forces a person to either evolve mentally or remain trapped forever inside the same patterns, destroying their future. And maybe that is why you are here right now. Because part of you already feels that something needs to change. Part of you is exhausted from thinking small. Part of you is tired of watching life pass while your potential remains buried under fear, procrastination, distraction, and self-doubt. The uncomfortable truth is that your greatest enemy may never have been money itself. Your greatest enemy may have been the mindset silently convincing you to stay exactly where you are. What you are about to hear next will force you to confront a reality most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Because there comes a moment when a person suddenly realizes their own mind has been keeping them poor the entire time. The day you realize your mind has been keeping you poor, there comes a moment in life that feels almost disturbing. A moment when you stop blaming the world long enough to look directly at yourself. Not at your job, not at your past, not at the people who disappointed you, yourself. And in that moment, many people discover something painful. They were never only fighting financial poverty. They were fighting mental poverty without even realizing it. Most people think poverty looks like an empty bank account. But mental poverty is far more dangerous because it hides inside ordinary thoughts that seem harmless. Thoughts like, people like me never become successful. I am too late. Nothing ever changes for me. I will probably fail anyway. Over time, these thoughts stop sounding negative. They start sounding normal. And once a destructive thought becomes normal, it begins controlling decisions without resistance. That is how invisible prisons are built. A person with a poor mindset can receive opportunities and still destroy them. They can make money and still remain financially unstable. They can dream about a better future while continuing habits that guarantee the exact opposite. Because the human mind always tries to protect the identity it has accepted. If someone secretly believes they are incapable of success, they will unconsciously sabotage every path that challenges that belief. This is why some people remain stuck for decades even while working constantly. They are physically active but mentally trapped. They wake up stressed, spend impulsively to escape emotional emptiness, compare themselves to others all day, avoid discomfort, and repeat the same emotional cycles until life begins feeling predictable and hopeless. Then they convince themselves that success only belongs to lucky people. But luck is not the main difference between successful people and unsuccessful people. The real difference is psychological tolerance. Successful people train themselves to tolerate discomfort, uncertainty, criticism, loneliness, delayed gratification, and temporary failure without collapsing emotionally. Most people cannot do that. The moment life becomes uncomfortable, they retreat into distraction, excuses, or self-pity. That is why mental poverty survives even when opportunities appear. Epictetus once taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 8, that human beings are disturbed not by events themselves, but by the views they take of them. This means two people can experience the exact same obstacle and create completely different futures from it. One person sees pain and quits. The other sees pain and adapts. One sees rejection and feels worthless. The other sees rejection and becomes stronger. The external event may be identical, but the internal response changes everything. Most people never realize how deeply their environment shaped the way they think about money, ambition, and success. Many were raised around fear, around phrases like money changes people, or rich people are selfish, or dreams are dangerous. Over time, those ideas become emotional programming. Even when someone consciously wants success, another part of their mind fears it because success feels unfamiliar. And the human brain naturally avoids unfamiliar identities. That is why some people destroy progress the moment life starts improving. They finally begin moving forward, then suddenly procrastinate, overspend, lose focus, sabotage relationships, or return to old habits. Deep down, their mind still feels safer inside struggle because struggle became emotionally familiar. Many people are addicted to survival without understanding it. Look carefully at modern society. People are constantly consuming but rarely creating, constantly reacting but rarely thinking, constantly entertained but internally empty. Attention spans are collapsing. Emotional control is disappearing. Discipline is becoming rare. And without discipline, wealth becomes almost impossible to sustain because success requires consistency long after motivation disappears. The dangerous part is that mental poverty often disguises itself as comfort. People say they want freedom, but many are terrified of responsibility. They say they want success but avoid the sacrifices attached to it. They say they want change, but repeat the same routines every day because familiarity feels emotionally safer than growth. This is why years pass quickly for most people. They are not intentionally building their future. They are emotionally reacting to life day after day without direction. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 7, paragraph 67, that the soul becomes colored by the nature of its thoughts. If a person constantly feeds their mind with fear, negativity, envy, distraction, and emotional weakness, eventually their reality begins reflecting those same patterns. But if someone trains their mind toward discipline, patience, resilience, and clarity, their life slowly begins transforming from the inside out. Everything changes when a person realizes the greatest limitation was never external. The moment you understand your thoughts shape your standards shape your actions, and your actions shape your future, you stop seeing yourself as powerless. You begin recognizing that your habits are either building your freedom or strengthening your prison every single day. And this realization can become terrifying. Because once you become aware that your own mindset has been silently holding you back, you can no longer pretend ignorance is the problem. You begin noticing how often fear controls your decisions, how often comfort destroys your discipline, how often distraction steals your future 1 hour at a time. You start realizing that many people around you are sleepwalking through life, repeating inherited beliefs that were never questioned. That awareness creates a decision. Either remain mentally trapped and continue blaming the world, or rebuild your mind completely and become dangerous to the life that once controlled you. But the next problem is even deeper than most people imagine. Because many people are not only afraid of failure, secretly they are afraid of becoming successful. Why most people secretly fear becoming successful? Most people will openly admit they fear failure. Very few will admit they fear success. But hidden underneath procrastination, inconsistency, self-doubt, and hesitation, there is often a deeper psychological conflict that almost nobody talks about. Many people are terrified that their lives will actually change. Because success is not only about gaining money. Success changes identity. It changes expectations. It changes relationships. It changes the way people see you and the way you see yourself. And for someone who spent years emotionally attached to struggle, uncertainty, and limitation, real success can feel threatening instead of exciting. That is why so many people sabotage themselves right before progress happens. You have probably seen this before. Someone starts improving their life, building discipline, making money, becoming focused, becoming healthier, becoming more confident. Then suddenly they disappear back into old habits. They lose momentum. They become distracted. They start procrastinating again. They waste opportunities they once prayed for. From the outside, it looks irrational, but psychologically it makes perfect sense. Their external life started growing faster than their internal identity could handle. Human beings are deeply attached to familiarity, even when familiarity is painful. A person who grew up around instability often feels uncomfortable in peace. A person who lived around negativity often feels suspicious of happiness. A person who spent years believing they were average will unconsciously resist becoming exceptional, because exceptional people attract attention, responsibility, pressure, and expectations. And many people would rather remain comfortably invisible than risk becoming truly powerful. This is one of the darkest psychological traps in modern society. People claim they want freedom, but emotionally, they fear what freedom demands. Because freedom removes excuses. Freedom forces responsibility. Freedom forces a person to confront their own discipline, consistency, emotional control, and habits without blaming anyone else. Success exposes character. Money exposes emotional weakness. Influence exposes insecurity. Opportunity exposes laziness. Responsibility exposes mental fragility. That is why many people stay stuck in cycles where they can continue blaming circumstances instead of confronting themselves. Remaining limited protects the ego from accountability. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, letter 28, that people often travel far away searching for peace while carrying the chaos inside themselves. The same happens with success. Many people chase external achievements while internally remaining emotionally unprepared for the life they claim they want. And the mind always protects emotional familiarity. This is why fear of success rarely sounds obvious. It disguises itself as perfectionism. Someone delays starting because they want the perfect moment. It disguises itself as overthinking. They analyze every possibility until action disappears. It disguises itself as comfort. They convince themselves they are satisfied while secretly feeling empty. It disguises itself as humility. They pretend shrinking themselves is wisdom, when in reality, they are terrified of stepping into their potential. The brain is designed to avoid emotional danger before physical danger. If becoming successful threatens someone's sense of identity, relationships, or emotional stability, their subconscious mind will resist progress automatically. That resistance appears through procrastination, distraction, fear, inconsistency, emotional exhaustion, and self-sabotage. Many people do not fear hard work. They fear transformation, because transformation requires letting go of an older version of themselves. And sometimes that older identity has existed for so long it feels impossible to separate from it. People become emotionally attached to being underestimated, attached to being the victim, attached to struggling, attached to being the person who almost succeeded. Because if they fully commit and still fail, then they would have to confront pain directly without excuses protecting them. So they stay halfway committed to life, halfway disciplined, halfway focused, halfway confident, halfway ambitious. Enough effort to dream, but not enough to truly transform. This creates a silent frustration that destroys millions of people internally. Deep down, they know they are capable of more, but they continue betraying themselves through hesitation. Every postponed decision weakens self-respect. Every abandoned goal sends a dangerous message to the brain. I cannot trust myself. Over time, this becomes identity, and identity controls behavior more powerfully than motivation ever will. Look closely at people who consistently grow in life. They are not fearless. They simply trained themselves to move while fear exists. They stopped negotiating with discomfort. They stopped waiting to feel ready. They accepted that growth always feels psychologically uncomfortable because the brain interprets uncertainty as danger. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, paragraph 20, that action delayed becomes life wasted. Most people do not realize how much of their future disappears through hesitation alone. Years vanish while they prepare emotionally for a life that only action can build. The terrifying truth is that becoming successful often requires disappointing the version of yourself that wanted comfort more than growth. It may require separating from people who secretly benefit from your weakness. It may require becoming misunderstood. It may require discipline when nobody applauds you. It may require walking alone for long periods while others continue distracting themselves with temporary pleasure and meaningless approval. That is why success is rare. Not because opportunity is rare. Not because intelligence is rare. Mental endurance is rare. The ability to tolerate loneliness while building your future is rare. The ability to remain disciplined without external validation is rare. The ability to continue moving forward while uncertainty surrounds you is rare. And this is exactly where most people collapse emotionally. Because the next trap is even more dangerous. Many people become so emotionally comfortable living with low expectations that they stop believing greatness was ever possible for them in the first place. The dangerous comfort of living with low expectations. One of the most dangerous things that can happen to a human being is not failure. It is adaptation to mediocrity. Because failure still contains tension, frustration, and movement. But when a person becomes emotionally comfortable living below their potential, ambition slowly dies in silence. They stop fighting for more not because they are incapable, but because they convince themselves expecting less hurts less. This is how low expectations quietly destroy lives. At first it sounds harmless. A person tells themselves they are being realistic. They stop aiming too high. They stop taking risks. They stop imagining bigger possibilities. Over time, that mindset becomes emotional protection. If they expect very little from life, disappointment becomes easier to survive. But the cost of that emotional comfort is devastating. Little by little, they begin abandoning the strongest parts of themselves. Most people never notice when this process begins. It starts in small moments. Someone stops pursuing a dream because they fear embarrassment. Someone remains in environments that drain their energy because leaving feels uncertain. Someone settles for relationships, routines, and habits they secretly hate because familiarity feels safer than transformation. Eventually, they stop asking themselves what they truly want from life, because deep down, they no longer believe they can reach it anyway. That is the psychological tragedy of low expectations. The human mind adapts to whatever standards it repeats consistently. If someone repeatedly tolerates disrespect, they begin expecting it. If someone repeatedly avoids challenge, they begin fearing discomfort. If someone repeatedly chooses convenience over growth, eventually discipline feels unnatural. Over time, people stop seeing their limitations as temporary and start seeing them as identity, and identity becomes a prison stronger than circumstance itself. Many people walking through life today are not physically trapped. They are mentally conditioned to remain small. They learn to hide ambition because ambition attracts judgment. They learn to silence their dreams because dreaming feels dangerous after repeated disappointment. They learn to act emotionally detached because hope makes vulnerability unavoidable. So instead of risking growth, they convince themselves they never wanted more in the first place. This is why some people criticize ambition so aggressively. Deep down, ambition reminds them of the version of themselves they abandoned years ago. Seeing someone disciplined, focused, and determined forces them to confront their own excuses. And rather than confronting themselves honestly, they normalize low expectations to avoid emotional discomfort. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 71, that people suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Many individuals destroy their future long before reality ever had the chance to challenge them. They imagine rejection, imagine failure, imagine humiliation, then emotionally retreat before taking action. Their life becomes smaller and smaller until survival replaces purpose completely. The modern world reinforces this behavior constantly. People are encouraged to seek comfort above all else. Endless entertainment, endless distraction, endless stimulation. Everything is designed to keep the mind passive and emotionally dependent on temporary pleasure. But comfort has a hidden cost. The more a person worships comfort, the weaker their tolerance for struggle becomes. And without struggle, greatness never develops. A strong life is built through tension, repetition, discipline, sacrifice, and emotional resilience. But most people have trained themselves to escape discomfort immediately. The moment life becomes difficult, they reach for distraction. The moment pressure appears, they search for relief instead of growth. This weakens the mind slowly until even small obstacles begin feeling overwhelming. Then they lower expectations again to avoid pressure entirely. This creates a vicious psychological cycle. Low expectations create weak action. Weak action creates weak results. Weak results reinforce low expectations. Eventually, people become convinced their limitations are permanent, when in reality they simply stopped demanding more from themselves. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, paragraph 30, that the mind becomes shaped by repeated thoughts and actions. If someone repeatedly chooses avoidance over courage, comfort over discipline, distraction over focus, eventually their character adapts to weakness. And once weakness becomes habitual, mediocrity starts feeling normal. That is why many people stay busy but never evolve. They wake up, repeat routines mechanically, consume distraction, complain about life, then repeat the cycle again tomorrow. Years disappear this way. Dreams slowly decay under the weight of emotional comfort. The terrifying part is that many people no longer recognize how much potential they buried inside themselves because mediocrity became emotionally familiar. And emotional familiarity is powerful. People often stay inside painful situations simply because pain they recognize feels safer than uncertainty they do not understand. That is why transformation requires psychological rebellion. A person must become willing to disappoint the version of themselves that settled for less. They must become willing to break patterns that once felt emotionally safe. Because low expectations do not protect people from suffering. They only guarantee smaller lives. The moment someone raises their standards internally, everything begins changing. The way they think changes. The way they speak changes. The way they spend time changes. The way they tolerate excuses changes. They stop negotiating with weakness because they finally understand something most people never learn. Nobody accidentally builds a powerful life. A powerful life is demanded internally before it ever appears externally. And the next realization becomes uncomfortable very quickly, because many people are not even fully responsible for the mindset they carry. Their environment has been programming their financial future quietly for years without them noticing it. Your environment is quietly programming your financial future. Most people believe their decisions belong entirely to them. They believe their mindset is original, their habits are personal, and their limitations are self-created. But what many never realize is that the human mind absorbs the emotional patterns of its environment constantly. The people around you, the conversations you hear daily, the energy inside your home, the content you consume, the standards normalized in your circle, all of it slowly shapes the way you think about money, discipline, ambition, and success. And the frightening part is that this programming happens quietly. Nobody wakes up one morning suddenly thinking small. It happens through repetition, through years of hearing fear disguised as advice, through constant exposure to negativity, excuses, emotional weakness, gossip, pessimism, distraction, and low standards. Eventually, the mind adapts to whatever it experiences most frequently. What once looked unacceptable slowly begins feeling normal. This is why some people grow up surrounded by limitation and never question it. If a person spends years hearing that success is unrealistic, eventually ambition begins sounding foolish. If someone constantly hears complaints about money, life, work, and responsibility, their brain starts associating adulthood with exhaustion and disappointment. If someone grows up around people who avoid discipline, avoid accountability, and avoid growth, those behaviors become emotionally familiar. The environment becomes identity before the person even realizes it. That is why changing your life often requires changing what surrounds your mind every single day. Many people are trying to build wealth while remaining emotionally connected to environments that reward weakness. They spend time around individuals who mock discipline, criticize ambition, glorify laziness, and normalize mediocrity. Then they wonder why staying focused feels impossible. Human beings unconsciously adapt to the emotional temperature of the people around them. If you stay long enough in a cold environment, eventually your own fire begins disappearing. Look carefully at how people speak when they are trapped mentally. They constantly say things like, "Life is unfair," "People like us never get ahead," "Money changes people," "Nothing ever works out." Those phrases may sound harmless, but repeated language creates emotional conditioning. The brain listens carefully to repeated thoughts, especially emotional ones. Over time, negative language stops sounding emotional and starts sounding factual. This is how entire generations inherit limitation without questioning it. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 3, Chapter 16, that a person becomes shaped by what they repeatedly give attention to. Attention is not neutral. Whatever dominates your attention slowly dominates your thinking. And whatever dominates your thinking eventually influences your behavior, your confidence, your decisions, and your future. That is why protecting your mental environment is one of the most important forms of self-respect. Most people protect their money more carefully than they protect their minds. They are selective about what they purchase, but careless about the conversations, entertainment, social media, and emotional energy they consume every single day. They allow negativity unlimited access to their thoughts, then wonder why they feel mentally exhausted and emotionally weak. The modern world is filled with emotional pollution, constant comparison, constant outrage, constant distraction, constant stimulation. People are absorbing thousands of thoughts, images, fears, opinions, and insecurities daily without realizing how deeply those things influence their emotional state. The mind was never designed to process endless noise without consequences. A distracted environment creates distracted thinking. A negative environment creates fearful thinking. A disciplined environment creates focused thinking. This is why successful people become extremely intentional about proximity. They understand that energy spreads psychologically. A person surrounded by ambition starts thinking differently. A person surrounded by emotional maturity begins handling pressure differently. A person surrounded by discipline slowly develops higher standards naturally, and the opposite is equally true. Weak environments slowly weaken strong minds if exposure lasts long enough. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 11, paragraph 29, that the quality of a person's mind depends heavily on the thoughts and influences they allow inside it. Most people underestimate this completely. They think success is only about strategy, but psychology always comes first. A person constantly surrounded by fear will eventually start fearing risk. A person constantly surrounded by excuses will eventually stop demanding accountability from themselves. This is why some people feel mentally drained after speaking with certain individuals. Some people carry emotional chaos everywhere they go. They spread pessimism, insecurity, gossip, envy, and emotional weakness unconsciously. Staying around those patterns long enough slowly reshapes your own emotional state until your standards begin collapsing without you noticing. The dangerous part is that toxic environments often feel emotionally familiar. People stay connected to destructive circles because separation feels uncomfortable. They fear loneliness more than stagnation. They fear being misunderstood more than remaining trapped. So they continue spending years around people who reinforce the exact mindset they are trying to escape. And this silently destroys potential. A person cannot build a powerful future while remaining emotionally attached to environments designed around limitation. Growth demands psychological separation from habits, conversations, and energies that weaken the mind. Sometimes the first step toward wealth is not making more money. Sometimes the first step is protecting your mind from people and environments teaching you to remain small, because eventually, your environment becomes your internal voice. And the next threat to your future is even more dangerous, because it feels pleasurable while destroying your discipline from the inside out. Most people today are trapped in an addiction that quietly kills focus, patience, and greatness before success ever has a chance to grow. The addiction to immediate pleasure that destroys greatness. Most people are not losing their future in dramatic ways. They are losing it quietly, one distraction at a time, one impulsive decision at a time, one moment of weakness repeated so often that it slowly becomes identity. And the terrifying part is that modern society rewards this behavior constantly. People are being trained to crave immediate pleasure while losing the ability to tolerate the discomfort required for greatness. This addiction does not always look dangerous in the beginning. It looks normal. Checking the phone every few minutes, escaping boredom instantly, needing entertainment while eating, while working, while thinking, while resting, constant scrolling, constant stimulation, constant noise. Most people no longer know how to sit alone with their own thoughts without reaching for distraction. Silence has become uncomfortable because silence forces confrontation, and confrontation is where transformation begins. The human brain naturally seeks pleasure and avoids pain. That instinct helped human survival for thousands of years. But in the modern world, this instinct is being manipulated constantly. Every notification, every short video, every impulsive purchase, every temporary distraction creates small bursts of dopamine inside the brain. And over time, the mind becomes emotionally dependent on stimulation. This destroys focus slowly. A distracted brain loses its ability to think deeply. A mind addicted to instant gratification struggles to pursue long-term goals because long-term goals require patience without immediate reward. and patience has become rare in a world where people expect emotional relief instantly. This is why so many people start projects with excitement, but abandon them quickly. The beginning feels stimulating. The dream feels exciting. But the moment repetition, boredom, difficulty, or uncertainty appear, their brain starts searching for easier pleasure elsewhere. Instead of building discipline, they escape discomfort. Instead of staying focused, they consume distraction. Instead of enduring temporary struggle, they seek emotional relief, and little by little, their potential disappears under endless stimulation. The frightening part is that many people do not even realize they are addicted. They believe they are relaxing, when in reality, they are training their mind to avoid effort constantly. Every time someone chooses temporary comfort over necessary discipline, they strengthen emotional weakness internally. Weakness repeated daily becomes character. Musonius Rufus taught that comfort weakens both the body and the mind when it becomes excessive. A person constantly seeking ease loses their ability to endure pressure, and without endurance, success collapses the moment life becomes difficult. Look carefully at the modern world. People want extraordinary results while living emotionally ordinary lives. They want wealth without sacrifice, confidence without discomfort, discipline without repetition, success without loneliness. But greatness has always demanded psychological resistance to immediate pleasure. Because immediate pleasure often steals long-term freedom. Every hour wasted in distraction feels harmless in isolation. But repeated over months and years, those moments become entire futures destroyed quietly. People underestimate how much their habits shape their destiny because habits feel insignificant while they are happening. But the mind is always adapting to repeated behavior. A person who repeatedly chooses distraction trains themselves to become distracted. A person who repeatedly avoids discomfort trains themselves to fear pressure. A person who repeatedly seeks easy pleasure loses the mental endurance required to build anything meaningful. This is why discipline feels painful to so many people today. Their nervous system has been conditioned to expect constant stimulation. Deep work feels uncomfortable. Reading feels difficult. Silence feels heavy. Patience feels unbearable. The brain becomes emotionally restless because it lost tolerance for stillness and focus. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, paragraph 36, that a person's happiness depends on the quality of their discipline over the mind. He understood something timeless. External chaos becomes dangerous only when internal control disappears. And internal control is disappearing everywhere. People are consuming more information than ever before while becoming mentally weaker at the same time. Knowledge without discipline changes nothing. Motivation without action changes nothing. Dreams without sacrifice remain fantasies. The dangerous thing about pleasure addiction is that it feels harmless while destroying ambition silently. A person says they will start tomorrow. They delay again. They waste another night escaping reality through entertainment. Another week disappears. Another year disappears. Eventually, they begin feeling frustrated without understanding why. Deep down, they know they are betraying themselves, and self-betrayal destroys confidence faster than failure ever could. Every abandoned promise weakens trust in yourself. Every delayed responsibility creates internal guilt. Every impulsive escape teaches the brain that comfort matters more than growth. Over time, people stop believing in their own ability to remain consistent because they train themselves to quit whenever discomfort appears. That is why emotional strength matters more than motivation. Motivation depends on emotion. Discipline depends on identity. A disciplined person understands something most people never learn. Temporary discomfort is the price of permanent transformation. They stop negotiating with their feelings constantly. They stop asking whether they feel like it. They act because they understand that every difficult action strengthens the mind while every act of avoidance weakens it. And this is exactly where most people collapse. Because the next problem goes even deeper than distraction. Many people are not only mentally weak from overstimulation, they are emotionally unstable in ways that quietly sabotage their ability to build lasting wealth and success. Why emotionally weak people struggle to build wealth. Most people believe wealth is built through intelligence, connections, or opportunity. Those things matter, but they are not the foundation. The foundation is emotional stability, because no matter how talented someone is, emotional weakness will eventually sabotage what discipline tried to build. This is why some people make money and lose it quickly. Why some people begin strong but cannot remain consistent. Why some people destroy relationships, opportunities, and progress the moment pressure appears. Their external problems are often symptoms of internal instability. An emotionally weak mind struggles to build anything lasting. Wealth requires patience. Emotional weakness demands immediate relief. Wealth requires long-term thinking. Emotional weakness reacts impulsively. Wealth requires clarity under pressure. Emotional weakness collapses under uncertainty. This is why emotional control is one of the rarest and most valuable forms of power in modern life. Most people are emotionally reactive without realizing it. Their mood controls their discipline. Their stress controls their decisions. Their insecurity controls their behavior. One negative comment destroys their confidence. One difficult moment destroys their consistency. One failure convinces them to quit completely. And because they never learned to control their emotional state, life controls them instead. Look carefully at how emotionally unstable people behave with money, opportunities, and pressure. They overspend to escape emptiness. They seek validation through appearances. They panic during difficult moments. They abandon long-term plans for temporary emotional comfort. Their decisions are not guided by logic or purpose. They are guided by emotional survival. That is one of the fastest ways to remain trapped financially. A person who cannot control impulses will eventually sabotage prosperity. Because wealth is not only about earning. Wealth is about restraint. It is about remaining calm when emotions demand reaction. It is about refusing to let fear, insecurity, loneliness, envy, anger, or anxiety dictate decisions. And most people never train this skill. The modern world encourages emotional impulsiveness constantly. People are taught to react instantly to everything. React emotionally. React publicly. React impulsively. There is very little emphasis on reflection, patience, silence, or self-control anymore. As a result, many people have become emotionally fragile without understanding how dangerous that fragility truly is. A fragile mind cannot handle responsibility for long. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 13, that the person who suffers before necessary suffers more than necessary. Emotionally weak people suffer constantly because their minds magnify uncertainty into catastrophe. They imagine disaster before action. They panic before difficulty even arrives. This destroys confidence because fear repeated consistently becomes emotional conditioning. Eventually, the person begins avoiding challenges entirely. This avoidance creates invisible poverty. People avoid investing in themselves because they fear failure. They avoid opportunities because they fear rejection. They avoid leadership because they fear criticism. They avoid discipline because discomfort feels emotionally overwhelming. Over time, their world becomes smaller and smaller because fear silently controls their behavior. And the terrifying part is that emotional weakness often disguises itself as personality. Some people say, "That is just how I am." But many behaviors they call personality are actually untrained emotional habits. Impatience, overthinking, jealousy, neediness, constant anxiety, lack of focus, emotional impulsiveness. These patterns are strengthened through repetition until they feel permanent. But they are not permanent. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 4, Paragraph 3, that the mind can transform itself by changing the thoughts it repeatedly accepts. This means emotional strength can be trained just like physical strength. But training requires discomfort, and most people spend their lives escaping discomfort instead of developing resilience through it. That is why emotional discipline separates powerful people from unstable people. Powerful individuals are not free from emotion. They simply refuse to become servants to emotion. They feel fear without surrendering to it. They feel pressure without collapsing. They feel uncertainty without abandoning direction. They understand that emotions are temporary. but decisions create permanent consequences. Emotionally weak people often mistake feelings for truth. If they feel insecure, they assume they are incapable. If they feel anxious, they assume danger exists. If they feel unmotivated, they assume action should stop. This mindset destroys momentum because emotions constantly change. A person who depends on emotion to remain disciplined will always struggle with consistency. True self-control begins when someone stops obeying every feeling that enters their mind. And this becomes especially important during difficult seasons of life, because pressure exposes emotional conditioning quickly. Some people become stronger through hardship. Others become bitter, impulsive, unstable, and self-destructive. The difference is rarely external circumstances. The difference is psychological preparation. Weak minds seek escape during hard times. Strong minds seek adaptation. This is why emotional maturity is deeply connected to financial growth. A mature mind can delay gratification. A mature mind can remain calm during uncertainty. A mature mind can think strategically while others panic emotionally. And strategy always outperforms emotional chaos in the long run. Many people destroy their future not because life defeated them, but because their emotions defeated them first. Their anger destroyed opportunities. Their insecurity destroyed relationships. Their impulsiveness destroyed discipline. Their fear destroyed action. Internal disorder eventually creates external disorder. But there is a deeper truth that changes everything once a person understands it. Emotional strength alone is not enough. There is another level of power that ancient Stoic philosophers understood clearly, a level where wealth stops being about money first and becomes about mastery over the self. The Stoic secret: wealth begins with self-mastery. Most people spend their lives chasing external wealth while remaining internally weak. They believe money will finally bring peace, confidence, control, or freedom. But the Stoic philosophers understood something most people still fail to understand centuries later. A person who cannot govern their own mind will never truly control their life, no matter how much money they possess. That is why so many wealthy people remain emotionally miserable. Money can increase comfort, but it cannot heal internal chaos. It cannot automatically create discipline. It cannot remove insecurity. It cannot teach emotional control. In many cases, money only magnifies the mindset that already existed before wealth arrived. A disciplined person often becomes more powerful with wealth. An unstable person often becomes more destructive. The Stoics understood that true wealth begins long before financial success appears externally. It begins with self-mastery. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, yet constantly reminded himself that external power means nothing without internal control. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, paragraph 30, he wrote that the mind becomes stronger when it learns to remain unaffected by things outside its control. That idea is deeply connected to modern success, because most people lose enormous amounts of energy fighting reality emotionally instead of mastering themselves mentally. Self-mastery means refusing to become a servant to impulse. It means your emotions no longer dictate every action. Your fears no longer control every decision. Your cravings no longer dominate your attention. Your environment no longer determines your identity. Most people never reach this level because they are constantly reacting to life instead of governing themselves consciously. The modern world encourages emotional slavery in subtle ways. People are taught to obey every feeling immediately. If they feel bored, they seek stimulation. If they feel stressed, they seek escape. If they feel lonely, they seek validation. If they feel uncomfortable, they abandon discipline. Their entire life becomes controlled by emotional reaction instead of intentional direction. This creates weak minds incapable of sustaining greatness. The Stoics believed freedom begins when a person stops becoming emotionally dependent on external conditions. That does not mean becoming emotionless. It means developing the ability to remain stable regardless of circumstances. A disciplined mind does not collapse every time life becomes difficult. A disciplined mind adapts, and adaptation is one of the highest forms of power. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, Chapter 1, that no person is free if they are not master of themselves. Most people hear that idea but never truly understand its depth. Someone addicted to approval is not free. Someone controlled by fear is not free. Someone ruled by anger, insecurity, distraction, or impulse is not free. They are psychologically imprisoned. And psychological imprisonment creates financial limitation because internal disorder eventually shapes external results. A person without self-control struggles to remain consistent. A person without emotional discipline struggles to think long-term. A person without focus struggles to create value deeply. This is why self-mastery becomes the hidden foundation underneath wealth, leadership, influence, and personal transformation. The strongest people are often the calmest people. Not because life became easier for them, but because they trained themselves not to panic every time pressure appeared. They stopped allowing temporary emotions to control permanent decisions. They learned how to remain mentally clear while others became emotionally overwhelmed. That ability changes everything. Most people waste enormous amounts of energy fighting battles inside their own minds every single day. Overthinking, comparing themselves to others, seeking approval, imagining failure, replaying past mistakes, craving instant pleasure, avoiding discomfort. Their attention becomes fragmented constantly, and fragmented attention destroys power. A focused mind becomes dangerous because focus creates momentum. The Stoics understood that attention is life itself. Whatever controls your attention slowly controls your future. That is why disciplined individuals become extremely protective of their thoughts, habits, routines, and environment. They understand that mental energy is too valuable to waste on meaningless distraction. Musonius Rufus taught that a strong character is built through repeated discipline, not temporary inspiration. That idea separates powerful people from ordinary people completely. Ordinary people wait until they feel ready. Disciplined people act regardless of mood because they understand identity is shaped through repeated behavior. Every difficult action strengthens self-respect. Every act of restraint strengthens inner authority. Every moment of discipline becomes proof that the mind is no longer controlled by weakness. And this creates a transformation deeper than financial success alone. Because a person who masters themselves begins walking differently through life. Their standards rise. Their confidence becomes quieter but stronger. They stop seeking constant validation because self-respect replaces approval addiction. They stop reacting emotionally to everything because they understand emotional chaos weakens judgment. They become internally stable. And internal stability creates external power over time. This is why many people remain exhausted despite constantly chasing success. They are trying to build external wealth while internally remaining disorganized. But no empire remains strong if its foundation is unstable. The same applies to the mind. True wealth begins when discipline becomes stronger than impulse, when purpose becomes stronger than distraction, when self-control becomes stronger than temporary emotion. And once a person begins mastering themselves, another dangerous truth becomes impossible to ignore. The mind conditioned by scarcity creates invisible forms of self-sabotage that quietly destroy opportunities before success ever has the chance to fully grow. How scarcity thinking creates invisible self-sabotage. One of the most destructive forms of poverty is not financial poverty. It is scarcity thinking. Because a person trapped in scarcity does not only struggle with money, they struggle with trust, confidence, patience, vision, and emotional security. Scarcity slowly changes the way a person interprets reality until fear becomes the center of every decision. And the frightening part is that most people do not even realize they are thinking this way. Scarcity thinking sounds normal in modern society. It sounds practical, cautious, responsible, but underneath it often hides deep emotional fear. Fear of losing, fear of failing, fear of not being enough, fear of being left behind. Over time, those fears begin shaping behavior automatically. A scarcity mindset trains the brain to focus on limitation instead of possibility. A person trapped in scarcity constantly thinks about what could go wrong. They hesitate before taking action. They doubt opportunities before exploring them. They protect themselves emotionally by expecting disappointment in advance. Eventually, they stop taking intelligent risks completely because safety becomes more important than growth. And this creates invisible self-sabotage. Many people say they want success, but their subconscious mind fears uncertainty more than they desire transformation. So the moment opportunity appears, the mind starts searching for danger automatically. They overthink simple decisions. They procrastinate important actions. They convince themselves they need more preparation, more certainty, more confidence before moving forward. But underneath all of it is fear. Fear disguised as logic. This is why scarcity thinking becomes so dangerous. It sounds reasonable while quietly destroying progress. A person with an abundance mindset sees opportunity and thinks about expansion. A person with a scarcity mindset sees opportunity and immediately imagines loss. One mind asks, "What can this become?" The other asks, "What if everything fails?" Over time, these internal questions create completely different futures. Because the brain always searches for evidence supporting dominant beliefs. If someone believes the world is full of limitation, rejection, and failure, their attention will naturally focus on proof reinforcing those ideas. They will notice obstacles more than opportunities, problems more than solutions, criticism more than possibility. Their perception itself becomes distorted through fear. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 4, Chapter 1, that human beings become trapped not by reality itself, but by the judgments they attach to reality. Scarcity thinking is exactly that. It is a habitual interpretation of life through fear and limitation instead of strength and adaptability. And the longer a person lives this way, the more self-sabotage becomes automatic. A scarcity-driven person often struggles to celebrate the success of others because another person's growth feels emotionally threatening. They compare constantly. They assume resources are limited. They secretly fear being left behind. This creates envy, insecurity, and emotional exhaustion because the mind begins living in competition with everyone around it. But abundance does not begin with money. It begins with psychological expansion. A person who thinks abundantly understands something powerful. Opportunities increase when value increases. Skills increase opportunities. Discipline increases opportunities. Focus increases opportunities. Relationships increase opportunities. Creativity increases opportunities. The mind begins searching for ways to build instead of ways to protect itself emotionally from failure. Scarcity thinking does the opposite. It creates defensive living. People stop aiming high because they fear disappointment. They stop trusting themselves because they fear mistakes. They stop investing in growth because they fear losing comfort. Every decision becomes emotionally centered around survival instead of expansion. And survival thinking keeps people trapped in cycles for years. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 12, Paragraph 1, that the quality of life depends heavily on the quality of thought governing the mind. A fearful mind creates a fearful life. A limited mind creates limited action. A person who constantly expects scarcity unconsciously behaves in ways that produce scarcity repeatedly. That is why many people unknowingly sabotage progress right when life begins improving. They finally start making progress financially, then suddenly overspend impulsively. They begin building discipline, then abandon routines that were helping them grow. They encounter opportunity, then convince themselves they are not ready. Deep down, their subconscious identity still feels emotionally connected to limitation, and the brain always tries to remain consistent with identity. If someone secretly believes they are bad with money, not successful, or not capable, their actions will unconsciously move toward proving those beliefs true. This is why mindset is not motivational language. Mindset becomes behavioral direction. Every thought repeated consistently strengthens identity. Every identity repeated consistently shapes behavior. Every behavior repeated consistently creates reality. This is why internal dialogue matters so deeply. Many people speak to themselves with constant negativity without realizing the psychological damage it creates. They insult themselves mentally, doubt themselves mentally, predict failure mentally, then wonder why confidence disappears under pressure. Confidence cannot grow inside a mind trained to expect collapse constantly. The Stoics understood that discipline over thought creates discipline over life. A person who learns to observe fear without obeying it becomes psychologically stronger than most people around them. They stop allowing temporary emotion to dictate permanent direction. And that shift changes everything. Because once a person escapes scarcity thinking, they begin recognizing another truth most people ignore completely. Success is rarely built through dramatic moments. It is usually built through silent habits repeated consistently while nobody is watching. The silent habits that separate wealth builders from dreamers. Most people are fascinated by results but completely blind to the habits that create them. They admire wealth, discipline, confidence, influence, and success, but they rarely pay attention to the silent behaviors repeated daily behind those outcomes. What separates people who build powerful lives from people who only fantasize about them is usually not intelligence or luck. It is consistency in small actions nobody applauds. Dreamers focus on inspiration. Builders focus on repetition. That is why so many people stay trapped in cycles of excitement, followed by disappointment. They become emotionally motivated for a few days, make dramatic promises to themselves, then slowly return to old habits the moment discipline becomes uncomfortable. Their lives are controlled by emotional intensity instead of structured behavior. And emotional intensity never lasts long. Real transformation is usually quiet. It happens early in the morning when nobody is watching. It happens during moments of boredom when discipline still continues. It happens when a person refuses distraction despite emotional temptation. It happens when someone continues building patiently while others seek immediate recognition. The strongest habits rarely look impressive in isolation. Reading consistently, controlling spending, managing emotions under pressure, protecting focus, thinking long-term, staying physically disciplined, learning constantly, avoiding meaningless drama, remaining calm during uncertainty. These habits appear ordinary, but repeated for years, they create extraordinary people. Most people underestimate the power of repetition because repetition feels slow. The human brain craves visible results quickly. That is why many individuals abandon good habits before transformation becomes visible. They want immediate proof their effort is working. But powerful lives are built through invisible progress long before external results appear. A disciplined person understands this deeply. They stop needing constant emotional reward to continue moving forward. They understand that every repeated action strengthens identity internally. Every time someone follows through on discipline despite discomfort, they are teaching the brain something important. I can trust myself. And self-trust changes everything. Many people struggle with confidence not because they lack ability, but because they repeatedly betray themselves. They set goals and abandon them. They make promises and break them. They delay important actions constantly. Over time, the brain loses respect for its own words because behavior no longer matches intention. Silent discipline rebuilds that respect slowly. Musonius Rufus taught that excellence is not built through occasional effort, but through daily practice aligned with virtue and self-control. This is why powerful individuals often appear calm externally. Their confidence is not built on temporary emotion. It is built on evidence created through consistent action over time. The modern world has made consistency rare. People are constantly distracted, constantly overstimulated, constantly emotionally reactive. Most individuals struggle to maintain focus long enough to build mastery because they seek novelty more than progress. They start many things, but finish very little. Wealth builders think differently. They understand focus creates depth, and depth creates value. Instead of chasing every opportunity emotionally, they commit to structured growth patiently. They understand that mastery requires repetition long after excitement disappears. And that mindset separates builders from dreamers completely. Dreamers wait until conditions feel perfect. Builders act while conditions remain uncertain. Dreamers seek motivation. Builders create systems. Dreamers chase attention. Builders chase improvement. This difference may seem small at first, but over years it creates radically different lives. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, Paragraph 1, that people often resist doing what improves them, even while knowing it is necessary. That struggle still defines modern life perfectly. Most people know exactly what behaviors would improve their future, but emotional comfort keeps defeating long-term discipline. And comfort destroys consistency silently. A person who constantly obeys temporary feelings becomes unreliable to themselves. If they feel tired, they stop. If they feel bored, they escape. If they feel uncertain, they hesitate. Their actions become emotionally unstable because their habits are built around comfort instead of purpose. Purpose-driven habits create mental strength. This is why wealthy and disciplined individuals become highly protective of routines. They understand routines reduce emotional chaos. A structured morning creates mental clarity. Controlled spending creates stability. Reading daily creates sharper thinking. Physical discipline strengthens emotional resilience. Deep focus creates momentum. Everything becomes connected internally. The strongest habits are often the least visible because they happen inside the mind first. Delaying reaction, controlling impulse, remaining patient under pressure, refusing comparison, avoiding emotional drama, protecting attention. These internal disciplines create external power over time, and power built slowly becomes difficult to destroy. Most people want visible success without invisible discipline. They want extraordinary lives built through ordinary effort. But reality does not work that way. The quality of a person's habits eventually determines the quality of their future, because habits shape identity daily. A person repeating disciplined behaviors consistently eventually becomes disciplined naturally. A person repeating distracted behaviors consistently eventually becomes mentally fragmented naturally. That is why small daily choices matter more than dramatic moments. Every action is either strengthening your future or weakening it quietly. Every routine is either building clarity or reinforcing chaos. Every repeated behavior is either creating freedom or deepening limitation. And this leads directly into another dangerous trap, destroying millions of lives today. Many people remain constantly busy, constantly exhausted, constantly moving, yet somehow never actually moving forward at all. Why most people stay busy but never move forward? One of the greatest illusions in modern life is the illusion of progress. People wake up exhausted, rush through their days, constantly answer messages, constantly react to problems, constantly consume information, constantly move from one task to another. Yet years later, their lives remain almost exactly the same. They mistake movement for growth and activity for transformation. But being busy does not mean becoming better. Most people are drowning in motion while starving for direction. The modern world rewards distraction disguised as productivity. Notifications create urgency. Endless tasks create emotional pressure. Constant stimulation creates the feeling of importance. People spend entire days reacting instead of building. Entire weeks disappear solving small problems while the bigger vision for their life slowly fades into the background. This is how people become trapped in survival mode permanently. A distracted life fragments attention, and fragmented attention destroys depth. Without depth, there is no mastery. Without mastery, there is no extraordinary growth. Most people never develop powerful skills because their minds are constantly interrupted before concentration becomes meaningful. They start something, then switch focus. They plan something, then become distracted. They dream about change, then emotionally react to daily chaos until another year disappears. And eventually they begin believing life itself is the problem, when in reality the problem is lack of intentional direction. A person without direction becomes emotionally controlled by urgency. Everything feels important. Everything feels stressful. Their mind becomes overwhelmed because they are constantly responding instead of consciously choosing. This creates exhaustion without fulfillment. Seneca warned about this in On the Shortness of Life when he wrote that people waste enormous amounts of life being busy without purpose. That idea has become even more dangerous in modern society. Today, people can spend entire days consuming stimulation without realizing how little meaningful progress was actually created. The brain loves easy activity because easy activity creates the emotional illusion of productivity. Checking messages feels productive. Watching endless motivational content feels productive. Talking about goals feels productive. Planning constantly feels productive. But none of those things replace focused execution. Wealth builders understand something most people ignore completely. Progress requires concentrated energy, directed toward meaningful priorities repeatedly over time. Without focus, effort becomes scattered, and scattered effort rarely creates extraordinary results. This is why many intelligent people remain stuck. They are not lacking ability. They are lacking sustained focus. The mind cannot build something powerful while constantly divided between distractions, emotional reactions, and meaningless urgency. Every interruption weakens momentum. Every distraction resets attention. Every emotional overreaction drains mental energy that could have been invested into growth. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 4, paragraph 24, that a person must remove unnecessary actions and unnecessary thoughts if they want clarity and strength. Most people do the opposite. Their lives are filled with unnecessary noise, unnecessary comparison, unnecessary drama, unnecessary consumption, unnecessary emotional reaction. Then they wonder why they feel mentally exhausted. A busy mind is not always a productive mind. Sometimes busyness is avoidance. People stay busy because silence forces self-confrontation. Constant activity prevents them from asking difficult questions. Am I truly growing? Am I wasting my potential? Am I building the future I actually want? Am I becoming stronger, or simply more distracted? Those questions make many people uncomfortable because deep down they already know the answer. A person can spend years working hard while avoiding the actions that truly matter most. They stay inside comfortable routines because meaningful growth usually requires difficult focus. Deep focus forces discipline. Deep focus removes excuses. Deep focus reveals whether someone is serious about transformation or simply attached to the fantasy of it. And fantasy is safer emotionally than commitment. Commitment creates pressure. Commitment demands sacrifice. Commitment requires consistency when motivation disappears. That is why many people unconsciously replace progress with busyness. Staying busy allows them to feel temporarily productive without confronting the deeper changes required for real growth. But time never stops moving. This is what makes distraction so dangerous. Most people do not notice life slipping away while it is happening. Days feel insignificant individually, but repeated distraction across years becomes an entire future lost quietly. A person says they will become disciplined later, focused later, financially intelligent later, emotionally stronger later. But later slowly becomes never. The strongest individuals understand something painful but liberating. Every day the mind is either advancing or deteriorating. There is no permanent neutrality. Habits are either strengthening focus or weakening it. Actions are either creating momentum or reinforcing stagnation. This is why powerful people become ruthless with attention. They protect their mornings, protect their energy, protect their environment, protect their focus, because they understand attention is one of the most valuable forms of wealth a human being possesses. Whatever repeatedly captures your attention eventually shapes your identity and your future. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 29, that a person becomes what they repeatedly practice. Most people practice distraction daily. They practice inconsistency daily. They practice emotional reactivity daily. Then they feel frustrated when their life reflects those patterns back to them. The uncomfortable truth is that progress often requires doing fewer things with greater intensity and discipline. Not more stimulation, not more noise, not more urgency. Greater clarity, greater intentionality, greater control over the mind. And this realization leads into something even deeper. Because true transformation does not happen only through better habits or stronger focus. At a certain point, success requires something far more uncomfortable, a complete shift in identity itself. The identity shift required to attract success. Most people try to change their lives without changing who they believe they are. That is why their progress never lasts. They attempt new habits while carrying the same identity that created their old reality. They want different results while emotionally remaining attached to the same mindset, the same fears, the same patterns, and the same self-image. But lasting success is not built through temporary action alone. It is built through identity transformation. Every human being acts consistently with the version of themselves they secretly believe to be true. A person who identifies as weak will unconsciously avoid difficult challenges. A person who identifies as unsuccessful will sabotage opportunities that threaten that identity. A person who identifies as disciplined will naturally move differently through life because their behavior aligns with who they believe they are internally. Identity shapes behavior more powerfully than motivation ever will. That is why people often return to old habits even after periods of progress. Their external actions change temporarily, but their internal identity remained the same. Eventually, the mind pulls behavior back toward familiarity because the brain always seeks psychological consistency. This is why transformation feels emotionally uncomfortable in the beginning. A person trying to become stronger mentally often feels internal resistance because the old identity fights for survival. The mind says things like, "This is not who you are. You never stay consistent. You always fail eventually. People like you do not change." Those thoughts are not objective truth. They are psychological echoes from an older identity trying to remain alive. And most people surrender to that voice without questioning it. The dangerous thing about identity is that it becomes invisible over time. A person no longer notices how deeply it controls decisions because repeated behavior starts feeling natural. Someone trapped in a weak identity begins expecting inconsistency from themselves. They normalize procrastination, normalize distraction, normalize emotional instability, normalize mediocrity. Eventually, they stop imagining a stronger version of themselves completely. This is why many people remain mentally trapped even when opportunities exist around them. Deep down, they cannot emotionally picture themselves becoming powerful, disciplined, wealthy, respected, or focused. Success feels psychologically distant because their self-image was built around limitation for too many years. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 10, paragraph 16, that the soul becomes shaped by the thoughts it repeatedly accepts. Identity works the same way. Every repeated thought either strengthens the future version of you or strengthens the old version, keeping you trapped. A person becomes what they repeatedly tell themselves they are. This is why internal language matters so much. Someone constantly saying, "I am lazy, I am unlucky, I lack discipline, I always struggle," is reinforcing identity through repetition. The brain listens carefully to repeated emotional language. Over time, thoughts become beliefs, beliefs become behavior, behavior becomes reality, and reality starts looking permanent even when it was psychologically constructed. The people who truly transform their lives understand something most never realize. Success begins the moment a person stops identifying with weakness, not pretending weakness never existed, not denying past mistakes, but refusing to remain emotionally loyal to an outdated version of themselves. That shift changes everything. A disciplined person does not wake up every day negotiating whether they should stay disciplined. Discipline becomes part of identity. A focused person does not constantly fight distraction because focus becomes part of self-respect. A strong person still experiences fear, but they no longer identify as fragile. Identity simplifies action. This is why powerful people often appear calm under pressure. Their self-image already includes resilience. When difficulty appears, they do not immediately collapse emotionally because hardship does not contradict who they believe themselves to be internally. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, Chapter 9, that no great thing is created suddenly. Identity transformation follows the same principle. A powerful self-image is not created through one motivational moment. It is created through repeated evidence gathered over time. Every difficult action completed strengthens identity. Every promise kept strengthens identity. Every act of discipline strengthens identity. The mind slowly begins saying, "This is who I am now." That sentence becomes life-changing. Because once identity shifts, behavior starts feeling natural instead of forced. A person who sees themselves as disciplined protects their time differently. A person who sees themselves as valuable tolerates less disrespect. A person who sees themselves as focused becomes more intentional with attention. A person who sees themselves as mentally strong stops running from discomfort constantly, and the external world begins responding differently to them because internal energy changes first. Most people are trying to attract success while internally remaining attached to insecurity, inconsistency, emotional weakness, and fear. But success is not only attracted through strategy, it is attracted through congruence. When thoughts, habits, standards, and actions align consistently, momentum begins building naturally. This is why self-respect matters so deeply. A person who respects themselves no longer tolerates behaviors destroying their future. They stop lying to themselves, stop wasting endless time, stop feeding destructive habits, stop remaining loyal to comfort while expecting greatness. Because eventually, they understand something powerful. The future version of themselves they admire can only appear when the current version stops thinking small. And this leads into another critical realization. Once identity begins changing, the brain itself must be trained differently. Because the mind follows patterns, and most people have spent years unconsciously training their brain for fear, distraction, and limitation instead of success. How to train your brain to think like a wealth creator. Most people spend years training their minds for survival without realizing it. Every fearful thought repeated daily, every impulsive reaction, every distraction consumed for hours, every excuse accepted emotionally, all of it slowly programs the brain toward limitation. Then they wonder why confidence feels unstable, focus feels difficult, and success feels distant. The brain adapts to repetition, whether the repetition is useful or destructive. That is why training the mind intentionally becomes one of the most important responsibilities a person can have. A wealth creator does not only think differently about money, they think differently about time, discomfort, discipline, focus, responsibility, opportunity, and themselves. Their brain has been conditioned to search for growth instead of emotional escape. And that conditioning never happens accidentally. It happens through repeated mental training. Most people underestimate how programmable the human mind truly is. The brain constantly rewires itself according to repeated thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and experiences. Modern psychology calls this neuroplasticity, but the Stoic philosophers understood this principle centuries ago through disciplined observation of human behavior. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, paragraph 16, that the soul takes the shape of the thoughts repeated most often. In modern language, that means repeated thought patterns physically influence the way the brain processes reality. This is why negative thinking becomes dangerous when repeated long enough. A person constantly imagining failure begins feeling fear automatically before action even begins. A person constantly consuming distraction loses tolerance for focus. A person constantly feeding insecurity strengthens emotional weakness neurologically through repetition. The brain learns through repetition, not intention alone. That is why wishing for confidence changes nothing if behavior continues reinforcing fear daily. A wealth creator trains the mind differently. They become intentional about what enters their attention because they understand attention shapes identity. They guard their environment carefully. They protect focus aggressively. They expose themselves to disciplined thinking repeatedly until discipline stops feeling unnatural. This process is uncomfortable in the beginning because the brain resists unfamiliar patterns. A distracted mind craves stimulation. A fearful mind craves certainty. A weak mind craves comfort. When someone begins building discipline, the brain interprets change as psychological danger because familiarity feels safer than transformation. That is why so many people quit early. They mistake discomfort for failure when discomfort is often evidence growth has already started. Training the brain requires repetition beyond emotion. A person cannot become mentally strong by acting disciplined only when motivated. The brain changes through consistency. Every repeated action sends instructions to the nervous system about what behaviors should become automatic. This is why routines matter deeply. Waking up intentionally, reading consistently, training the body, controlling spending, limiting distraction, protecting focus, managing emotion under pressure. These are not random habits. They are neurological training systems shaping the mind towards strength, clarity, and self-control. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 3, Chapter 12, that character is built through repeated practice. A person becomes calm by practicing calmness, disciplined by practicing discipline, focused by practicing focus. The mind always adapts to repeated behavior, and repeated behavior eventually becomes identity. This is why many people remain trapped despite consuming endless motivational content. Information alone does not rewire the brain. Repetition does. A person can listen to powerful ideas every day while continuing behaviors that reinforce weakness internally. The nervous system believes action more than intention. That is why self-respect grows through evidence. Every time someone follows through despite discomfort, the brain records proof of strength. Every time someone controls impulse instead of obeying it, the brain strengthens emotional discipline. Every time someone remains focused despite distraction, attention becomes sharper over time. The opposite is equally true. Every impulsive escape strengthens weakness. Every abandoned goal strengthens inconsistency. Every act of avoidance reinforces fear neurologically. People often think transformation happens suddenly, but the brain changes slowly through accumulated repetition. That is why patience becomes essential. Most individuals quit because they expect immediate emotional reward. But mental rewiring requires sustained effort beyond temporary feelings. A wealth creator understands this deeply. They stop expecting instant results from disciplined behavior. They understand that invisible internal change happens before visible external success appears. The brain must first learn stability before life reflects stability externally. This is why emotionally reactive people struggle with consistency. Their minds have been conditioned around emotional dependence. If they feel inspired, they act. If they feel tired, they stop. If they feel uncertain, they hesitate. Their behavior changes constantly because emotion controls direction. A trained mind behaves differently. It acts according to standards instead of moods. This creates psychological power, because emotional chaos loses authority over behavior. The person begins trusting themselves more deeply because actions become consistent regardless of temporary emotion. And consistency creates momentum. Musonius Rufus taught that a disciplined life strengthens both character and judgment because repeated self-control sharpens the mind itself. Modern neuroscience supports this completely. The more someone practices restraint, focus, and intentional behavior, the stronger those neural pathways become over time. The mind becomes what it practices repeatedly. That is why many people unknowingly train themselves for distraction daily. Endless scrolling, endless comparison, endless emotional reaction, endless overstimulation. Their nervous system adapts to fragmentation until deep focus begins feeling almost painful. But the brain can recover. Attention can strengthen again. Discipline can become natural again. Confidence can rebuild again. A person who trains their mind intentionally long enough eventually develops something rare in modern society: internal authority. They stop being controlled by every emotion, every trend, every distraction, every external opinion. Their thinking becomes sharper. Their decisions become calmer. Their actions become more deliberate. And this creates separation from the majority very quickly. But there is a painful reality many people still refuse to face. Staying mentally poor does not only damage financial growth, it slowly destroys emotional health, self-worth, relationships, and the ability to feel genuinely alive. The emotional cost of staying mentally poor. Most people understand the financial pain of poverty. They understand stress, debt, instability, and limitation, but very few understand the emotional destruction created by mental poverty. Because the deepest damage is often invisible, it happens internally, quietly over years, until a person no longer recognizes the version of themselves they could have become. Mental poverty slowly destroys self-worth. A person trapped in scarcity begins doubting themselves constantly. They second-guess decisions, compare themselves endlessly, feel threatened by other people's success. hide their ambitions to avoid judgment. Over time, they stop trusting their own potential because disappointment has emotionally conditioned them to expect less from life. And expectation shapes emotional reality. A person who expects failure eventually begins living defensively instead of intentionally. They avoid risks, avoid opportunities, avoid discomfort. Their life becomes smaller and emotionally safer, but also emptier. Deep down they know they are capable of more, yet they continue betraying themselves through fear and hesitation. That internal conflict becomes exhausting. Many people today are not physically tired. They are emotionally drained from living disconnected from their potential. Every day they ignore the stronger version of themselves, and every ignored possibility creates silent frustration internally. This frustration appears in dangerous ways: irritability, envy, bitterness, constant comparison, emotional numbness, lack of purpose, loss of self-respect. The mind begins carrying invisible emotional weight because it knows something is wrong, even when the person refuses to confront it consciously. This is why mentally poor people often struggle to feel peace even during comfortable moments. Their external environment may appear stable, but internally they feel trapped. They consume distraction constantly because silence forces awareness, and awareness becomes painful when someone realizes how much of their life has been controlled by fear instead of intention. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 9, that a disturbed mind cannot find peace no matter where it goes, because the disturbance travels within the person themselves. That idea explains why external comfort alone never heals internal emptiness. A person can improve their circumstances while still remaining emotionally imprisoned by insecurity, comparison, emotional weakness, and self-doubt. Mental poverty damages relationships too. A person carrying deep insecurity often struggles to celebrate others genuinely. They become emotionally reactive, defensive, jealous, needy for validation. They may seek external approval constantly because internally they feel insufficient. This creates unstable emotional patterns that slowly weaken trust, connection, and intimacy. The tragedy is that many people do not even realize their emotional suffering is connected to the way they think. The brain listens constantly to repeated internal dialogue. If someone spends years mentally insulting themselves, expecting disappointment, imagining failure, fearing rejection, and comparing themselves to everyone around them, emotional exhaustion becomes inevitable. The mind cannot produce peace while being trained for psychological warfare daily. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 7, paragraph 56, that the quality of a person's inner life determines the quality of their external experience. Most people attempt to solve internal suffering externally. More entertainment, more distraction, more consumption, more temporary pleasure. But temporary pleasure cannot heal chronic self-betrayal. A person who repeatedly ignores discipline weakens self-respect. A person who repeatedly avoids growth weakens confidence. A person who repeatedly chooses comfort over purpose slowly loses connection with their own power. And eventually, life begins feeling emotionally heavy even when nothing dramatic is happening externally. This is why mentally poor individuals often feel stuck in invisible emotional cycles. They wake up unmotivated, drift through the day distracted, compare themselves to others online, feel anxious about the future, escape discomfort through entertainment, then repeat the same cycle tomorrow. Years disappear this way, and the pain becomes even deeper because part of them understands they are wasting their potential. That awareness creates quiet suffering. Musonius Rufus taught that human beings experience deep inner conflict when their actions repeatedly move against reason and self-discipline. Modern psychology describes this similarly through cognitive dissonance. When behavior consistently contradicts values, emotional tension grows internally. The person knows what they should do but keeps avoiding it. This slowly destroys trust in the self. And once self-trust weakens, life begins feeling unstable emotionally because the person no longer believes their own promises. They say they will change, then abandon themselves again. They say they will focus, then return to distraction. They say they will become disciplined, then surrender to comfort. Every repeated betrayal deepens emotional exhaustion. This is why mental poverty often creates hopelessness, not because the person lacks ability, but because they stopped believing their actions matter. That belief is devastating psychologically because hopeless people stop investing in themselves. They stop building, stop imagining, stop risking growth. They emotionally surrender before life even finishes testing them, and surrender slowly kills ambition. But there is another truth that changes everything once a person finally understands it. The people who truly become wealthy, disciplined and powerful, usually stop obsessing over money itself. At some point, they begin focusing on something far more valuable. They begin focusing on becoming valuable themselves. The moment you stop chasing money and start building value. Most people spend their lives chasing money directly. They obsess over income, status, possessions, and appearance, believing those things will finally make them feel successful. But the people who build lasting wealth eventually discover a truth that completely changes the way they think. Money follows value far more often than desperation, and desperation is exactly how many people approach success. They desperately want quick results, quick recognition, quick wealth, quick escape from discomfort. But desperation weakens judgment because it makes people emotionally impatient. An impatient mind struggles to think long-term. It wants immediate reward even when immediate reward destroys future growth. This is why so many people remain trapped financially despite constantly trying to succeed. Their focus stays fixed on outcomes instead of development. They ask, "How can I make money?" before asking, "How can I become more valuable?" That question changes everything, because value transforms the individual first. A valuable person thinks differently, speaks differently, solves problems differently, controls emotions differently, handles pressure differently. Their presence itself becomes stronger because value is not only about skill, it is also about character, discipline, reliability, focus, and self-mastery. Money becomes a reflection of usefulness over time. The modern world confuses attention with value constantly. Many people want to appear successful more than they want to become capable. They chase visibility before competence. They chase validation before discipline. They chase lifestyle before internal strength. But appearance without substance eventually collapses. A person can temporarily imitate success externally, but if the foundation underneath remains weak, pressure will expose everything eventually. This is why true wealth builders become obsessed with growth before reward. They develop skills quietly, study deeply, strengthen discipline, improve communication, sharpen focus, control emotion, build patience, increase reliability. While others seek fast recognition, they focus on becoming difficult to replace. And that mindset creates enormous separation over time. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 3, Chapter 24, that human beings should focus less on appearances and more on becoming excellent internally. That principle applies directly to wealth and success. External success without internal substance creates fragile lives. But internal excellence eventually produces external results naturally. Value compounds. A stronger mind creates better decisions. Better decisions create better habits. Better habits create stronger opportunities. Stronger opportunities create momentum. And momentum changes life. Most people underestimate how deeply value affects confidence too. Real confidence is not built through pretending. It is built through competence and self-respect. A person who continuously develops themselves walks differently because internally they know they can adapt, learn, solve problems, and endure discomfort. That creates quiet power. A valuable person does not panic every time life changes because their greatest asset is not external circumstance. Their greatest asset is the person they have become internally. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 7, paragraph 68, that the true worth of a person depends on the things they devote themselves to consistently. Most people devote themselves to comfort, distraction, entertainment, emotional reaction, and temporary pleasure. Then they feel frustrated when life reflects those priorities back to them. A powerful life requires powerful priorities. The people who transform themselves financially usually stop thinking like consumers and begin thinking like creators. Consumers ask, "What can I receive?" Creators ask, "What can I build?" Consumers chase comfort. Creators develop capacity. Consumers seek emotional relief. Creators seek growth through discipline. That shift changes the entire direction of life. Because once a person becomes valuable internally, opportunities begin appearing differently. Relationships improve. Confidence strengthens. Decision-making sharpens. The mind becomes calmer because purpose replaces emotional chaos. And perhaps most importantly, the person stops depending emotionally on external validation. This is one of the greatest hidden forms of wealth. A person obsessed with approval becomes emotionally controlled by other people's opinions. They fear criticism constantly, fear judgment constantly, fear rejection constantly. Their life becomes shaped around being accepted instead of becoming powerful. But a person focused on value thinks differently. They become less interested in impressing people and more interested in mastering themselves. That creates freedom. Musonius Rufus taught that discipline and usefulness create dignity, because human beings gain strength when their lives contribute meaningfully, instead of existing only for pleasure. That idea feels almost revolutionary today because modern society constantly encourages self-indulgence over self-development. But self-development changes destiny. The moment someone stops asking, "How do I get rich quickly?" and starts asking, "How do I become mentally, emotionally, and practically valuable?" their entire future begins shifting. Because value attracts opportunity naturally. A focused mind becomes valuable. A disciplined mind becomes valuable. A trustworthy person becomes valuable. A resilient person becomes valuable. A calm mind under pressure becomes valuable. And people who build enormous value internally often discover something surprising. Wealth becomes a byproduct of who they are becoming, not something they desperately chase every day. This is why the final transformation has very little to do with money itself. At the deepest level, the real battle was always about refusing to remain mentally small, and the moment a person truly rejects that smallness internally, their entire life begins changing in ways most people never experience. Your life changes the day. Your mind refuses to stay small. There comes a moment when a person becomes exhausted with their old mindset, exhausted with fear controlling decisions, exhausted with procrastination stealing time, exhausted with emotional weakness destroying discipline, exhausted with watching life move forward while potential remains trapped inside hesitation, distraction, and self-doubt. That moment changes everything, because transformation rarely begins with external opportunity. It begins with internal refusal, a refusal to keep thinking small, a refusal to remain emotionally attached to limitation, a refusal to continue living beneath the level of discipline, focus, and strength a person knows they are capable of building. Most people spend their lives waiting for life to change them. Very few decide to change themselves first, and that decision creates separation immediately. The truth is that mental poverty was never only about money. It was about identity, about standards, about emotional conditioning, about the invisible beliefs silently controlling behavior for years. The person who constantly doubts themselves creates hesitation. The person addicted to comfort creates weakness. The person obsessed with distraction destroys focus. The person afraid of discomfort avoids growth. Everything was connected, and once someone sees this clearly, they can never return to unconscious living again. That awareness becomes powerful because excuses begin losing control. The mind stops blaming circumstances automatically and starts asking harder questions instead. Questions like, what habits are destroying my future? What fears are controlling my decisions? What distractions are weakening my mind daily? What version of myself have I been protecting emotionally because change feels uncomfortable? Those questions create awakening. Most people avoid them because honesty demands responsibility. And responsibility is heavy for minds trained around avoidance. But the moment someone accepts responsibility for their own thinking, a new kind of power begins developing internally. Not loud power, not performative confidence. Quiet power. The kind built through discipline repeated consistently. The kind built through emotional control during pressure. The kind built when a person stops negotiating with weakness every day. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, paragraph 48, that a person's life becomes what their thoughts repeatedly shape it into. That idea should disturb anyone still living unconsciously, because if repeated thought creates repeated behavior, then repeated behavior eventually creates destiny. And destiny is not built in dramatic moments alone. It is built in ordinary moments repeated daily. The moment someone chooses focus over distraction, discipline over impulse, growth over comfort, purpose over emotional escape, those small decisions begin reshaping identity slowly until the person no longer recognizes the weak version of themselves that once accepted limitation as normal. This is why powerful transformation often feels lonely in the beginning. A person evolving mentally starts separating from old patterns naturally. Old conversations feel empty. Old distractions lose emotional control. Old habits begin feeling destructive instead of comforting. The person becomes more intentional because awareness changes standards permanently. And higher standards change life. A person with strong standards protects time differently, protects energy differently, protects attention differently. They stop allowing every opinion, every trend, every distraction, and every emotional impulse to enter their mind freely, because they understand something most people ignore completely. The quality of life depends heavily on the quality of what controls the mind daily. That realization creates freedom. Not perfect freedom from difficulty, not freedom from uncertainty, freedom from internal slavery, freedom from being controlled by every temporary feeling, freedom from constantly sabotaging yourself emotionally, freedom from shrinking your potential to fit inside fear. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 19, that true strength appears when a person governs themselves instead of becoming governed by circumstance. That is the real definition of power. Not domination over others. Domination over weakness within yourself. Because once the mind becomes stronger, life begins responding differently. Opportunities become clearer. Decisions become calmer. Discipline becomes more natural. Confidence becomes quieter but deeper. The person stops needing constant external validation because self-respect replaces approval addiction. And this changes relationships, habits, standards, ambition, and direction completely. Most people will never experience this transformation because they never fully commit to becoming different internally. They remain emotionally loyal to comfort while hoping for extraordinary lives. But extraordinary lives demand psychological evolution. The old identity must die. The fearful mindset must lose authority. The distracted mind must become disciplined. The emotionally reactive self must become stable. And the person must finally accept that nobody is coming to rescue them from the consequences of their own habits. That truth feels heavy at first. Then it becomes liberating. Because once a person understands their mind created much of the prison surrounding them, they also realize the mind can become the key that opens it. Musonius Rufus taught that human beings become honorable through disciplined action, aligned with reason and character. In modern language, that means your future changes the moment your actions stop obeying fear and start obeying purpose. That is the real beginning of wealth. Not money first, mindset first. Because a person who controls their mind becomes dangerous to limitation itself. And the moment your mind refuses to stay small, your life can no longer remain the same.